being one of them, so back off on that, Forrest." Burnett nodded. "Okay, my apologies." There was something about the culture of this region that John always admired coming from New Jersey. Contrary to stereotypes, there were aspects of Southern culture that nearly all observed. One was respect for women, something that too many called sexist, but John saw as just basic, decent politeness. Burnett had crossed a line regarding another man's wife and had immediately pulled back. It raised his opinion of him a few notches. It was survival, Forrest. If we took in everyone who came up through the pass after everything went to hell, and yes, over the mountains too, we'd have been feeding 10 times as many, and everyone would have died within 2 months. I got forced into the position. I didn't like it, but I had to make decisions that were tough, and if I didn't, no one would have lived. And I'll bet you would have done the same and most likely did and are still making those decisions. Yeah, well, the same with us here. Didn't give you the right to rate us as you do? That granny woman who looked at your head used to be a nurse at Memorial Mission in Asheville," Burnett replied, as if shifting the subject to safer ground. "I got people up here with me, the same as you, before everything went sour. Mostly working folks born in these mountains, unlike the rich bastards that started to flood into Asheville, too many of them. Trust fund brats playing at being hippies and jacking the price of a few acres of land through the roof because they like the view. Then they turned around and wanted taxes raised for their pet projects and pushed us out. Oh, we were good enough to do the hard labor when things were good, but the day after the power died, it was get the hell out and stay out. George, who damn near killed you, his family's lived up here for near on to 200 years. A damn good carpenter. Most of his family starved to death by the first winter. Then one of your trigger-happy shooters killed his older brother in that ambush last fall. You're lucky he didn't blow your head off." "Maybe he wants to castrate me in front of everybody," John retorted angrily. "Don't joke. You ain't far from the truth. He sees it as payback." John fell silent. "Point is, we are trying to survive, same as you. We might look like a ragged lot, no fancy civility like you got down in Black Mountain and that college where I heard you were a professor before all of this. Difference was that a lot of those up here were of tougher stuff and refused to conveniently die off. Up here, folks still had a handle on a lot of the old ways. Oh, we were quaint for the tourists from Atlanta driving through along the Parkway or coming up here once a year to buy Christmas trees. That was actually our biggest cash crop back then, other than weed. Ever think how many folks are buying Christmas trees now or making a living on farmland that was played out generations ago?" John did not reply, sensing the wisdom to not interrupt. "So how do we survive whenever a town like yours sealed itself off? Too many folks for too little good land, and within several months the forest hunted out so completely I ain't had a taste of venison in over a year, and someone bringing in a greasy possum was a reason to celebrate." John did not say anything or reveal that after the cup of coffee and the long hours of being either tied or handcuffed to the bed he was about to explode. Burnett, sensing his distress, pulled out a key, unclipped the cuff around John's ankle, and motioned to the door, which John gratefully headed for. "John." He looked back. Burnett was casually holding his .45. "Nice gun, John. Hate to shoot you with it if you try to run. It would spoil George's day, me killing you rather than him getting to." Even if the temptation to run had been there, as John staggered off to the edge of the tree line, he knew it would be hopeless. Whoever these Reivers were, there were certainly a hell of a lot of them around, and they knew the ground far better than he could ever hope to figure out. The clearing around the mountain crossroads was an encampment, a hodgepodge of old RVs and pickup trucks with canopies rigged over the rear bed. Some fires were burning. Over one of them a pig was speared and being turned over the fire, most likely one of Step's spring sucklings. There were nearly as many children as adults. A ragged lot, most of them, just like the children in Black Mountain the winter after the day, hanging about whenever someone had managed to snag some game. The scent of it wafted out into the street. Finished with his task, John slowly walked back to the hut they had put him in. Burnett nodded, uncocking the semi-automatic and holstering it, the holster John had been wearing just hours before. "You ever shoot a man before everything went bad?" Burnett asked as John sat back down. I never fired a shot at someone with intent to kill until I had to execute that kid who stole drugs from the nursing home. I think it best not to ask what you went through in Afghanistan." "Something like that," Burnett replied calmly. "Look, let's cut the crap with this working-class sergeant from the mountains versus a colonel who you think had a silver spoon up his butt. I didn't grow up in the mountains, but I sure as hell grew up in a tough place in New Jersey, so I know the game. If you hate my guts for that, so be it. All of us are in a world of shit now, so what is it you want from me if you decide not to kill me? Or is this just some head game for your entertainment before you string me up or blow my brains out?" Burnett nodded and stood up after several minutes of silence. "My wife, well, she left me the year after I came back from the war minus an arm, an eye, and half my mind. Had a son, heard they're dead, along with the bastard she hooked up with, killed or executed." He hesitated. "They were living down in Charlotte. I heard long afterwards they fell in with that posse." John lowered his head. "Merciful God," he whispered. "Maybe you or one of yours was the ones that shot her. I don't give a good damn about the bum she hooked up with. I hope someone did kill him, slowly. But still, she was once my wife, and my boy was with her. You shoot any kids with that group, John Matherson? He'd have been 12. John looked up at Burnett. "No, we didn't shoot any kids that day. If any were still traveling with them, they were left behind before the fight and scattered afterwards. If she was with them, Forrest, you know what I had to do. They were literally cannibals, and that was beyond the pale of any civilized society, or at least the civilization we're trying to rebuild." Burnett was silent, just looking down at him as if weighing the life-or-death decision. "What would you have done?" John finally snapped back. "If you had taken any prisoners from that group of cannibal barbarians, what would you have done?" "Are you pleading with me, Matherson?" "Hell no," he snapped back. "Whatever you're going to do will most likely happen no matter what I say." "You shoot my people for snatching a few pigs. And again, in this mad world, you're doing the same, killing mine. Maybe one of my closest friends is dead because of what happened a few hours ago, and if he is, you know all bets with me are off if you let me go." Burnett started for the door and then looked back. "A hell of a shitty world we've been handed, Matherson. Makes Afghanistan look like paradise. It's what America is sinking into now, Colonel. Think about it. America, the new Afghanistan." "Was that what we fought for over there?" John asked. "Is that what we're fighting to prevent now?" Burnett smiled, and for a moment there was that frightful 2,000-yard stare. "You'll have my decision regarding what to do with you at sundown," he snapped as he slammed the door shut and locked it. Chapter 5, Day 735. "There's the flag of truce," Burnett whispered. "Now remember, the slightest wrong move and everyone is wasted." Things were still slightly blurry, the lingering after-effects of the concussion. "My people honor their word. I'm more worried about yours." They were sitting in an old Polaris four-wheel drive off-road vehicle that had been upgraded with an attempt at some armor across the front to protect the engine. John and Burnett sat in the back seat, a couple of the Reavers, heavily armed men, up front. A half-dozen other vehicles of Burnett's had stopped a quarter-mile back above the north shore of the reservoir, and with professional skill spread out on foot to either flank. John did worry now that maybe the entire thing was a setup, an ambush to wipe out some of his best before putting a bullet in his head. It was good at least to be back out in the open after 3 days locked up in the fetid cabin. He got twice daily visits from Maggie, who advised him to just stay in bed and let the concussion heal, and the food had actually been rather good. Indulgent, even, given that it was pork stolen from the Stepp family, and rather than saving or rationing it, the group had been gorging themselves on it as if there were no concern for tomorrow. Only problem was chewing it, between the sore jaw on one side from getting slugged and the bad tooth on the other side. Maggie actually took a look at it and offered to pop that little old thing out, but he adamantly refused. Burnett had dropped in a few times, conversations short and a bit taunting that the group was still debating his fate, implying that execution was still an option, but John knew that was just a sham to see how he'd react. Why waste precious food on a doomed prisoner? Then this morning they had blindfolded him and led him out of the hut he was quartered in. He could hear the crowd gathered around to watch, some jeering, and for a moment his heart sank. Without comment from Burnett, he was shoved into the back seat of the Polaris, and the expedition left the encampment. He said nothing, but there was definitely a wave of relief. Execution would have been a public affair. They were most certainly not just driving off into the woods for a private shooting. He could sense they were going back up over the Mount Mitchell range. It was a tedious, hammering, head-splitting climb of a couple of hours, and then an equally jolting drive back down what must have been a fire road through the forest until coming to a stop, and Burnett unfastened the blindfold. "So, you're letting me go?" "Trading you," Burnett chuckled. "Your weight in salt. We got plenty of ammo and food, but salt is getting hard to find." John took that in, not really feeling humiliated. A long time ago, trading prisoners for salt had been a practiced norm. Weighed in silver also? For Burnett's group, salt was more valuable than silver. Salt meant preserved food. Silver was to those living in a barter world just metal, though Doc Wagner was experimenting with grinding pure silver into a formula for antibiotics. But salt could preserve hundreds of pounds of meat and was a dire necessity of diet, especially in the heat of summer. There was a long stretch of straightaway ahead paralleling the left shore of the reservoir, the same place where he had been ambushed, and in the distance John could see his people deploying out. "The negotiated agreement was 20 on each side as escorts, salt to be left in the road, but I suspect your people got a lot more hidden to the flanks." "Same with yours," John said, looking back at the assortment of vehicles. He could sense the tension. Though confined in the squalid cabin during his stay with the Reivers, he could easily hear the conversations and arguments. George indeed arguing it would bring prestige to them if they strung John up and then sent his body back as a warning. "So why didn't you kill me?" John asked. "I have a hankering for salt," Burnett replied, "and this is the easiest way to get it." "It's more than that," John replied, and he actually forced a smile. "The real reason." Burnett sat back, asking the two escorts who were sitting up front, one of them George, to get out and go up the other road and signal when everything was clear. They were not happy with the assignment, but followed his orders. "Let's talk," Burnett announced, and then he did something remarkable for John. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes. Merciful God, they were actual Dunhills. Opened the pack, lit one up, and offered it to John, who was nearly trembling at the sight of them. He finally shook his head. "I heard you were quite the smoker," Burnett said. "You seem to know a lot about me." "I had a few people in with you for a while." John gazed longingly at the cigarettes, but then remembered the day he quit. "Once an addict, always an addict," he thought, "and if I have one now, I'll be begging for more, giving this man the advantage." He shook his head in refusal, though he did breathe in deeply as the smoke curled around him. Burnett shrugged at his refusal and stuffed the pack into his battle jacket tunic. "This is about more than me being traded for salt," John said.
"Yep, ball is in your court, Matherson, so start talking. I can still change my mind and blow your brains out here in front of those people of yours, toss your body out, and bug you back over the mountain."
"You want a war? Because that will trigger it."
"My camp is mobile, you saw that. I can be 20 miles away before nightfall. You and yours are stuck in one place, and we'll just keep pecking away at you. I have all the advantages of mobile offense over static defense, and you know it. And you don't have the manpower to send an army up over my mountains. We know far better than your people. We'll run you ragged, wear you down, and just keep picking you off."
"So you are telling me you hold all the cards?" Burnett smiled.
"Most of them. If you throw in with this new government in Asheville, you just might have more, but word is half your strength is getting drafted off, making you even more vulnerable."
"So back to the original question," John said. Why the trade? It's about more than salt. Burnett shrugged.
You tell me.
You want a truce? John replied.
A trade in our favor, I'd prefer to call it.
I don't give away favors without a quid pro quo, John snapped. And besides, I said it the first day and will say it again now, just so everything is perfectly clear. If I find out my friend Maury was killed by your people, especially that psycho of yours, George, it becomes personal for me, mayor of the town or not. You'll have a personal vendetta on your hands.
Ballsy talk for someone I could still shoot now,
Burnett said, and he actually smiled and then nodded.
Your friend is okay. My negotiator checked on that.
Wish you had told me earlier, spared me some anxiety.
Psychological advantage, Matherson.
Yeah, thanks. There was an inward sigh of relief with that news.
You're beginning to sound like a professor, John, with this quid pro quo stuff, but I know what you mean. What's in it for you and yours?
Exactly.
Other than your life, of course.
John nodded.
I want a secure southern flank,
Burnett said, nodding back to the high range of Mount Mitchell. You already have that. My folks don't venture over it. The area is pretty well hunted over for food anyhow, so you have no worries if that is your big concern.
Not from you, Matherson. From the feds setting up in Asheville. We kept clear of them when the Army was there, though they did send a few expeditions up Interstate 26 to Johnson City and back. That was a joke. We could have shredded them, but didn't want to pick the fight, and they really didn't want to go off chasing us. But this new group moving in, there's been news reports even on the shortwave of this million-man army they're forming up. I figure those poor bastards will be off to Texas and California, but they are also talking about taking out groups like us. We get jumped out in the open by one Apache helicopter while on the move, and a couple hundred of my people get killed.
Apache helicopter? Burnett took a deep drag on his cigarette, tossed the still smoldering butt, fished another one out, and lit it with an old Zippo bearing the insignia of the 101st Airborne, a deft act for a man with one arm.
Yeah, you've been out of the loop for a few days. My spotters saw 4 choppers, 2 of them Apaches, come in and land at the old shopping mall parking lot. They've got a defensive perimeter up there, a regular base, it seems. Did you know about this?
News for me, too, John replied, honestly surprised by the information. When I met with Fredericks, he said they were getting some assets in. I had no idea it'd be Apaches.
Still in desert paint, Burnett said. They must have shipped them back from the Middle East anyhow. I got enough worries without dealing with that as well. You put in a word to just leave us alone, and I'll count that as part of this quid pro quo thing of yours.
John shook his head. I doubt if I'll have any influence, but I'll see what I can find out. But I'm making no promises, Forrest.
You weren't in Afghanistan. I was, and I'm paranoid about someone having air superiority over us since it was the only real advantage we had against the Taliban. I'll let you go. You negotiate on my behalf with that person down in Asheville to leave us alone, and other than some pig and chicken redding, we'll leave them alone.
He paused.
And you too.
I won't be your proxy, John said. You have one hell of a murderous record.
Pot calling the kettle black, Matherson. How many did you kill in the old Fort Pass? How many did you personally execute, starting with those 2 drug-addled punks?
Different situation, John said softly.
They're still dead. And my ex and my son, maybe 2 of them. And over the last 3 days, I thought more than once I should just even the score and be done with you.
John took a deep breath. So again, why didn't you?
Because I'm stuck in the same boat you are at times. You officer types maybe read Machiavelli. You'd be surprised how many of us waiting it out in barracks read some of the same shit. Machiavelli said a prince had to transcend traditional morality for the greater good of those he led.
John looked at him, unable to contain his surprise. Burnett cleared his throat.
I might be a good old boy, John, but that doesn't mean I don't read. You know the old line about soldiering being long months of boredom interspersed with occasional moments of pure terror? A lot of time to read. I even thought about making the Army a career until this happened.
He pointed to his empty sleeve and torn face. John felt genuine admiration for the man. He was a consummate actor in many ways, but then again most good leaders were, knowing how to play their audience. Now, with just the two of them, he realized Burnett could easily slip into an academic discussion on the literature of war. There was an awkward moment of silence between the two, finally broken with Burnett leaning over the side of the Polaris to spit and mutter an obscenity.
Look, John, for now you agree not to come over the mountain, and we'll try to do the same.
Try?
You saw my group. I can only order them so far.
You know if any of my people get hurt, we'll come after those who did it.
To the top of the mountains, no farther.
That's a bit one-sided, Forrest.
That or nothing. I'd at least try to restrain things a bit along this front. Over toward Tennessee, there's a lot of easier pickings there anyhow for right now. Better crop and grazing lands than what you got.
John hesitated. He knew he wasn't going to get any further than where they were. Of course, he most certainly did not want to get shot now, so close to freedom, an act that would trigger a deadly firefight between the two sides, but he did not want to just sell out. I'll agree to this. You try to hold your people back, and I'd suggest that you break camp and move north. Do so, and you got no concerns from us.
Fully intended to anyhow, once back, in case you decided to try to screw me over and launch an attack tonight. But I warn you, none of you will get over the mountain. We know it better than you do, and we'll be watching.
John nodded. Understood, but I'd suggest moving anyhow for now. Gives me a bit of leverage. You can look down our throats at any time from up at Craggy Pass. That fact had always made John uncomfortable. From the top of Craggy Pass along the old Blue Ridge Parkway, anyone posted there with a good spotter scope could look straight down into Black Mountain. Within a few more days, he was going to have air power as well, a classified project that apparently Burnett did not know about. The wreckage of the old L-3, piloted by his friend Don Barber, who had been killed in the fight for the pass, had been ever so slowly reconstructed. There were enough pilots still alive in the community, itching to get back up, and with the plane he could again monitor things out in every direction for 75 miles or more, including the Reivers territory and their perch atop Craggy Pass. I can recall from drives up along Craggy years ago that you can see the town hall.
One of the reasons we like having a watch station up there,
Burnett replied.
And if you are asking me to give it up, the answer is no.
He knew Burnett was not going to concede giving up a vantage point like Craggy and other points along the old Blue Ridge Parkway that allowed him to watch any movement in a 50-mile radius. Perhaps it could be turned to an advantage and help avoid future problems. Let's do this, John offered. If I feel there's a problem between us, I'll run up a signal on the big flagpole at the old car dealership, 3 American flags, one atop the other.
And?
I'm trying to set something up between us to avoid future hassles. I'll use that as a signal that I want to talk. You fly some sort of flag in return up at Craggy when ready to meet, and we meet here. If you feel we need to talk, send a messenger down to my watch post at the end of the reservoir here. We both work to keep our people back from each other. You keep that nutcase George away, and I'll make sure the steps aren't running amok.
Why talk?
We're doing it now, aren't we? It's better than continuing to kill each other.
Yeah, okay.
Forrest, differences are going to come up. We're trying to step back from what eventually was going to be a full-scale blowout. We both have people who'd want that, so we set up a means of talking at times to smooth things over. Better than continuing to kill each other, isn't it? Burnett took it in and finally nodded.
Okay, John, deal. Now get the hell out of here. I think your people and mine are getting itchy, and I don't want any mistakes.
John got out of the Polaris feeling a bit lightheaded, but then he steadied himself. I wouldn't mind getting my vest and .45 back. The gun belonged to my dad, who carried it in Nam.
Kiss my ass,
Burnett replied with a wry smile.
Spoils of war.
John shrugged and started to turn.
Matherson.
He looked back, and Burnett was extending his hand. At first, John thought he wanted to shake, and he reached out. Burnett put a cigarette into his hand and laughed.
You'll trade big time for these if I get you hooked again. I got cartons of 'em.
Laughing, he called for the driver to get back in and start to back up.
You are one lucky son of a bitch, Matherson.
It wasn't Burnett, it was George, casually pointing a rifle in his direction.
I should have put my second round right into your face.
John knew better than to reply. He just started the long walk of several hundred yards along the lake shore, and as he drew closer to his own side, there was an immense sigh of relief. He could see Maury in the passenger seat of the lead jeep, left arm in a sling. There was no reason now for a vendetta. Burnett must have known his friend was alive all along. He slowed and started to turn to look back and actually offer a salute, a symbolic gesture in front of both sides that issues above and beyond his mere release in exchange